Alright all, like the title suggests, in today's video I'm going to show you how to do the cable management in that new gaming PC you built here in 2021. There's a few reasons why you want to do this. Number one, you want to try to keep your cables bunched up. That way, if you have issues in the future, you kind of know where the cables are running and whatnot, which makes it nice for diagnostics. Also, you spend all this money and everything for the ARGB and everything else for your computer to keep the front looking nice and neat. And when you tie them down in the back, you do some cable management in the back, it helps keep all that excess cable from going into the front and messing up the way the computer looks in the front. And when it comes to cable management, you ought to actually be thinking about this when you first start building your computer. When you start putting the components together to get your computer up and running, you ought to be thinking about this when you're building it, to see how you want the cables to run from the back of the case into the front of the case and whatnot. You also want to put some thought into how you're going to want a cable management, because you want the bigger cables on bottom and then fit the smaller ones on top. To get this done, there's a few tools that you're going to need. I would recommend, which is going to make the job a little bit easier on you. The number one tool that you're going to need to get this done will be your zip ties. Now your case and your PSU will come with a few of these, but I'd recommend picking up a small bag of extras just to make sure you have enough, because sometimes when you do your cable management, you will have to cut off zip ties and replace them. So you want to make sure you have enough of these. The second tool that I use is a small pair of side cuts, or you can use scissors if you'd like. But this is just to cut off the excess zip ties. Once you get them tightened down, you pull them through, there'll be that little tail sticking out. And I use these just to cut that extra excess off, just to make it look a little bit nicer and more finished. And the third tool that I recommend using, which this ain't really necessary, this is just me, but I also use a small pair of needle nose pliers. There's a couple reasons why I use this. You'll see in the video when I get into doing the cable management that I use these because some of my tie down points is back in little channels around the side of the case, and you got to dig them zip ties out sometimes. So they come in handy for that. Also, here's your zip tie. If you look at the zip tie, it's got a little bit of a bend right here. And this ain't by mistake. You know, these aren't to kind of fish through the tie down points on your case. But sometimes even with that little bit of a bend, it's a little bit harder to get them to go through the tie down points. So the second way I use my needle nose pliers, I like taking a pair of needle nose pliers here, grabbing a hold of it, and just kind of wrapping them around the needle nose pliers here. Putting a little bit of tension on it, then letting it up. And as you can see, the difference in the zip ties now, from this little bit of an angle here, up to this here, after I twisted it around the needle nose pliers, it just makes it a lot easier to feed through them tie down points. But we went through the reasons why you'd want to do some cable management. We went through the tools that's going to be necessary to do some of this cable management and to get it looking nice in the back of the system. Let me show you the video of how to get this done, and then I'll be back with my conclusion to the video. Alright guys, you just got done building that fancy new gaming computer here in 2021, and this is pretty well something like what you're looking at the back of your computer. Like I said, you know, in today's video I'm going to show you how to cable manage. I'm going to show you how to get on these cables looking all nice and pretty back there. Probably by the time you get to this point, you already did a boot test on it to make sure everything's working right, make sure all your RGBs is hooked up and all that. You know, you done booted it up and it's working fine. So this will be the next step. And this is a pretty common setup, I believe. I got 5 ARGB fans in the system. I got 2 in the top, 1 in the back. I got the 2 in the front for the radiator. I did have to get the converter box for mine because my motherboard don't have ARGBs. It only has RGB, so I had to get a converter box for that. I did add some extension cables to my build, so I do have a lot of excess cable here that I'm gonna have to deal with. But basically, guys, it's pretty simple. You know, you want to start out with your biggest cables first and get them laid where you want to lay them at, and then the smaller cables you want to kind of fit in around this. You know, because the big thick cables like your 24 pin and your 8-pin CPU cable and your GPU cables, you know, that's going to take up the most room in the case. I'm lucky. The PSU I have actually have flat cables instead of the round cables, so it makes it a little bit nicer and a little bit easier to deal with. You still have a lot of cables to deal with, and to make it look good, it's going to take you a while. And just for reference, down here's the bottom of the computer. This here is the back of the computer. This up here is the top of the computer, and this is the front of the computer. Just to give you a reference of where your cable should be lying at. And yes guys, yours may be a little bit different depending on your case, depending on your power supply, what fans you're using. My fans, my ARGB fans, The ARGB cables actually do all daisy chain together, which is this big long section right here. That's all my fans daisy chain together. Yours may or may not do that. There's my ARGB for my pump and my 2 front fans, because Fractal design Celsius plus 280, 28 plus 28, they all do connect through the one cable and run off the pump head. But here's some extra cables laying up here that I had to pull through the back off them front fans. I'm gonna have to deal with them as well. That's just some excess that I didn't want in the front of the case to keep the front of the case looking nice and pretty. So I pulled them around back, and I'm gonna have to do something with those as well. And one thing you want to keep in mind when you do this is whenever, especially these ARGB headers, they do come apart fairly easy. So you do want to make sure that they are all connected by the time you're done with moving the cables around. Sometimes you will have to disconnect cables and reconnect cables depending on the situation at hand. So let's go ahead and get started with this. That one is actually already laying where I had it before. I'll make sure I get my big cables pretty well where I want them to lay. So we'll do the 8-pin here. We'll kind of shove it back here in the back. Okay, 24-pin. And because of them extension cables, there ain't a whole lot I can do with it besides just throw it down here along the bottom and run it across. And the front of this case, it has that hide bar that hides the cables from the front. So it kind of limits me on what I can do with that 24-pin. But that'll look alright. I think that'll finish it up nicely. You do have this track here. If you decide to use this track, you can use this track in the back of this case for running your cables. To me, it's a nice feature, but a lot of times these cable management tracks is in the wrong place, or they don't give you enough access or whatever to the cables that's needed. I will run the front cables from the top of the case that goes down underneath and back up into the motherboard. We will be running them through this channel here today. So I am going to make some utilization of it. So we'll go ahead and get them laid down here in the track, get the Velcro straps ready to go here, and we'll start Velcroing these down. These Velcro straps are pretty nice because you can always undo them and redo them if you want to add cables later to it or whatever. So them are a pretty nice thing to have if you have them or if your case comes with them. Speaking of them front ports up here at the top, you'll notice I got my fan splitter coming off my motherboard up through this hole. And then I got it tucked underneath this cable, which that's going to be alright. It's going to help hold it down, and I won't have to put a zip tie or nothing on it because them cables will hold pressure against it. We'll go ahead and start up here at the top with all these RGBs and fan cables and all this fun stuff. We're just going to kind of bunch them together. And you can tell on the case it does have quite a few tie down points for cable management. They got them down the back, they got them up here in the front, up here at the top. You know, in most cases have these, especially if you got a decent case. Most cases have a good bit of these for you to help keep all this tied down. But we're just going to take some zip ties here. And we're going to start doing some of these fan and RGB cables. And when I do my zip ties, guys, when I first do my zip ties, I just get them started. I don't really tighten them down at first. Just in case I find an extra cable or something I need to run through that. Just kind of get them started, get them in place. Alright guys, now we got that basically laid out the way I'd like to have it. And as you can tell, my zip ties are still fairly loose. Like I said, I just get them started. That way, if I want to add cables through that channel that I created. And by keeping them zip ties loose at first, you know, you can move the cables if you need to get the slack where you want it and whatnot to make it look the best. And sometimes you'll have to cut zip ties off and replace them if necessary. You know, that's why I recommend having extra ones. Down here in the bottom, now we're down here at the bottom part of the computer. We have all these wires. There's a SATA cable, and there's the PSU cables, and all these extra cables laying around. I also have my little converter box that's ended up down here, which that's a good place to keep because it is fairly thick. So putting it there against the, which it's got a little bit of a magnet to it, so keeping it down here on the PSU kind of keeps it flat with the back of the case, which is nice. And that works out pretty good, I think. Alright, so now we got all that bunch of cables already taken care of. Let's, we'll jump over here on this side and take care of these extra cables, which these is going to be fairly simple. I'm going to take them, tuck them down and my 24 pin here and put a zip tie right here to kind of hold them. And again, make sure them connectors are together. Alright guys, since that's going to be the only cables in this area, we're going to go ahead and tighten this one down. We'll go ahead and tighten that one down. I'm going to go ahead and leave that excess there for right now. Then when we get done, we'll go back and cut all that off. And because we got these cables running underneath these front ports here, we're going to go ahead and throw the extra zip tie on there just because we can. Just to help them keep them down towards the back of the case some, back of the motherboard tray here. Just kind of help keep them sunk down because there ain't really enough cables for them zip ties to really be real tight on them. So that'll kind of give them a starting point there and kind of keep them nice and tight for us, which we're still going to leave that one loose. Alright, now we're going to get into this bottom mess down here. Deepcool RGB to ARGB controller box here. It's got a little bit of a magnet to it. We're going to leave that on the side of the power supply right there. And guys, don't be afraid to utilize that basement that's in that computer case. A lot of companies are making cases with basements, and this is why they're making them with basements, because a lot of people request them. A lot of people like them. That way they can have all these unnecessary cables and whatnot, and these big bunches of cables. Here's my the PSU cables that runs to my GPU right here. I'm going to take it, and sometimes you will have to do this. I took 2 zip ties and put them together to make it long enough. I'm just going to zip tie these together here. And I know there ain't going to be nothing else added to these, so I'm going to go ahead and make these nice and tight. Going to snug them down. And I'm going to do a second one here. I'm just putting 2 zip ties together here. That way it's long enough to fit around all that bunch of cables. I know there ain't going to be no more cables added to these, so we're going to go ahead and cut these off because they're going to be hidden. And I don't want to forget them. We'll leave them lay up here for right now. Alright, now we got our SATA ports here for our hard drive. We got the SATA cable. We have the SATA power that comes off the PSU. There really ain't a whole lot we can do with these. And that's one thing to keep in mind, guys, when you're doing your cable management. A little pro tip for you. Don't be afraid to zip tie cables to other cables to keep them in place. Because the main thing you're looking to do is keep all the access out of the front of the case. And to keep all the extra cables in the back where they're hidden. So if you have to, don't be afraid to wire tie your cables together, even if you don't have a tie down point in that section. And like a SATA cable for the hard drive, they have a bad tendency to slide through. So we're going to go ahead and put a zip tie on that and connect it to the 24 pin cable there. Just kind of help keep it in spot. Pretty well, we're going to take this big set of cables here. I'm going to run it back through here using that basement again, and I'm just going to shove them down in there, which is going to take that whole bunch and put them down inside that basement for you. And we still got a few little squagglers laying here. And just like I did with that front, I think I'm just going to take some zip ties and tie these cables all together to get them looking as nice as I can here. And of course, this is behind the PSU shroud, or the basement of the computer, plus behind the PSU. So nobody's going to ever really see these cables. As long as you got them pulled taut up here at the top, that's where they're all leading to. You know, you shouldn't have no problem with them, with any excess getting loose in the front. And don't be afraid to double up a cable. You know, like that one right there. I'm just going to double it up. I'm going to connect it with these ones. Which that there, still got a little bit of a scraggle on that one. We're taking, push it back this way underneath these other cables here that's already zip tied. Just like so. And them still fairly loose. That one's a little tight, but this one's still fairly loose. If I want to add more cables to it or whatnot, I can. I'm just going to take that and shove it back in the basement. Make sure all of our little ARGB connectors, see that one there came disconnected too when I was pulling on it. There we go. Put that back together. Alright, now since we got it pretty well the way we want it laid out, we're going to go ahead and tighten down these zip ties. Then we're going to cut off the X3. Alright guys, let me get reset up here and I'll come up with a conclusion to the video. Alright all, and that's pretty well the way I do my cable management, my thought process behind it. If you need to buy extra zip ties, you need to buy a small set of side cuts or a pair of needle nose pliers. I'll put the links in the description below for you. Also, if you'd like to know the specs to make up my system, I didn't go through them because it really wasn't relevant in this case, in this video. But I also have them in the description if you'd like to know what ports make up my system. But I think it's a pretty common layout. I got 5 ARGB fans in my system. I have a SATA hard drive in my system. I put them extension cables along from my motherboard. So I added some extra cable to it. I think this is a pretty common setup, and the amount of wires that you'll be looking at that you need to cable manage. Like I showed in the video, you know, I kind of keep all the ARGB wires in one area. You know, I keep the power cables in another area. You know, it just kind of makes it easier whenever you're diagnosing your system. You know, if your fans quit working or your ARGB quit working or whatever, you know what part of that cables to look at. Like I've mentioned, you know, I try to keep my bigger cables on the bottom towards the back of the motherboard tray, then put my smaller ones in top. Kind of the process of my thinking of this. I thought it turned out looking pretty good for a cable management job. I'm pretty happy with the results that I ended up with in this. If you like this kind of content, go down and give me a like. If not, there's that dislike button. There's that comment section below. I also go through them every weekend here on my live stream, Saturday morning, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the US. If you're also interested, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I don't kill your inbox, but I do put up photos and new stuff I have coming in. You kind of give you an idea of what's coming up on the channel. Or if there's a reason why I got to change the time or I got to cancel the live stream, that's where you also be notified of that information. But with all that being said, you all have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video or live stream.